it would be fair to say, as Ed Sullivan used to say, I think we have a really big shoe for you today. And so it's the Underground Utilities Mapping Project Team of March 27, 2005. First thing up is to take a look at our agenda. There it is as published. The general layout is always chair, vice chair comments. Then we'll wander through phase one update. I'll give you an overview. Then you're going to get some updates on developments on the FuzionView uh, product itself, both from Bob Bisquez and then the implementation and future development plan. Adam Franco is going to chat at us for a bit. Then Adam and Bob are going to run through the project CGA presentation as currently envisioned. We'll do a little bit of a chat here on phase two, the data collect module development plan. Bob Esquez will chat there. Then we'll clean things up with an open discussion period. Marketing development. Kelly will finally show up to chat at us, so that's a good thing. And then additional comments, announcements, other business. Wrap up. But we got to take it easy on Kelly because, after all, she is the chair and she does have the opening comments. Kelly, over to you.
Yes, thank you. I'm excited to talk through the agenda today with some, especially with the presentation of the overview of the presentation we're going to do at CGA next 2 weeks from now. And then also obviously an update on the field collection, and then actually just talking a little bit at the end about people's ideas in terms of outreach for continuing to move the FuzionView process forward and getting more and more folks into the system from the facility operator side. So thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. As usual, my comments are pretty straightforward. Quick notes for you. Just a couple of ideas about when we're going to meet next for the leadership. We've been meeting at a very rapid pace since the last quarterly meeting. We've been probably averaging every other week, but the next time we're going to give ourselves a little break here because, as you'll see, certain things are going to come to gel here over the next month and a half or so. And so the next time the leadership's going to get together is going to be April 18th. Next large group meeting, Thursday, June 12th. Write it into your calendars if you haven't already done so. And if you want to email me death threats or whatever, you can do that at chair@mgacepc.org. Takes us quickly into overview. As I indicated, I'm going to yap at you for a bit here, and then Bob and Adam will be able to add some highlights to the items that I'll be able to work through and trying to update you where the project's at and where things are headed. So to do that, I've got 4 bullet points that I'll be reviewing with you. I'll do phase one, the FuzionView software itself update, transition discussions. What's that? That is as I indicated, we've had a series of meetings within the leadership group that did deep dives on certain elements, and I'll walk you through kind of 3 high points from each of those discussions, and then chat a bit about some other developments, and then a review of where we are for the near-term timeline. Um, Phase one, FuzionView update. There it is. As you can see, from March 14th forward to 1 year later. Core software has gone from 35%. We think the software, we would rate it at being at 99% complete based on what was required out of the project requirement document. And then their project development, we're showing that has gone from 21% to 96%. What's the difference between core software and project development? There's certain additional pieces that go beyond the core software, documentation, user information, other things that we considered needed to be done as part of moving this project forward. So the software is literally at the verge of the back and forth now between ShareGeo and OCC to fine tune the software, get it running on their system, that sort of thing. But the guts of it are there. And then the project development, there's some loose pieces that need to be cleaned up to get us where we need to go. So that's kind of the overview on the FuzionView side. And then the transition discussions that I mentioned earlier, based on previous input from the large this group, and 6 deep dive meetings and interviews in January and February, the UUMPT leadership team has developed an initial transition plan, and that's kind of as we talked through each of these elements, we made more or less hard decisions in most places about how we thought we would handle certain elements going forward. And as you can see there, we did these deep dive meetings on structure, finance, legal, security, marketing, and then there were 2 interviews. Kelly and I chatted with the AXA lead for the underground community about insurance, how to think about that. And then I did a chat with MinOps and gathered, again, trying to bring information in, sort of taking this final last look at the way this project's been put together, how it's been run, and how we need to think about transitioning away from where we are. And I hope for the large group, you will consider and understand that we have been taking notes on your responses, and we've tried to dial those inputs into where we got to on some of these issues. So a little bit dry to run through just slides with words on, but I don't know a better way to try to relate what the leadership team has come up with as we have worked our way through these various decision points. So here's the first one, structure. Um, and what I would ask you to do is, as I talk through these, if you have ideas or questions that you would like to bring up, please jot them down. And then in the comment period at the end of today's discussion, I would ask you to, maybe float it at that point in time because I've got to move through these with some degree of speed. But so here we go with the first one. Is there a need for continuing the UUMPT process in some form? So basically, the leadership team came up with a thinking that this process has been beneficial and it should be continued at a point past the field data collection product, if at all possible. And then the next question down is, it is anticipated the support provided to the UUMPT by the Minnesota Geospatial Advisory Council's Emergency Preparedness Committee, you can call that me, will terminate sometime in the next 16 months. So how should that transition be handled? So you've kind of been in this collective operating environment that we tried to make sure was non-proprietary and that everybody could have a voice in it so that we came up with the best possible answer. And in theory, we are, at this point where we need to start thinking about what does that transition looks like. Well, this is maybe one that you call we kick the can down the road a little bit by saying, well, we need to develop a clear plan. We don't know exactly what that clear plan is going to look like just yet. Perhaps a UUMPT effort becomes something that ends up operating as a function of the Minnesota CGA. So that's kind of where that one sits. If you got ideas about maybe if there's a other community group out there where it would make more sense for somebody to pick up the administrative load, things of that nature, by all means, please be open to offering your ideas about that. And then we said, okay, so at what point should that transition occur? Kind of repeats the first question in a way. And the decision was made was the goal for us is to try to make that transition happen after the field data collection project is complete. So somewhere we're thinking somewhere between September of 25 and August of 26. So back to that 16-month kind of window, maybe sooner, but not later. So that's kind of the goalpost, if you will, on this one. So that's structure. And then the next thing that we did a deep dive on was financing. Well, we have the financing that is sufficient to complete the software development to get Gopher State One Call and OCC up and running. However, there's a potential shortfall of an estimated up to 71,000 to complete packaging for open source release. And there's a variety of discussions that are going on how to fill that. And, again, if there's organizations out there that are interested in trying to make sure that what's the difference between Gopher State One Call and OCC and getting to the open source. The open source product will be more robust. It will have more modules that are available, which will facilitate, I don't want to say, plug and play, but it will be darn near that. And so, discussions are ongoing with various potential funding sources of Gopher State One Call, OCC, CGA, other ticket management companies, professional organizations, other state call centers. So that discussion is ongoing. And if you have a place and interest in that, by again, all means, I would ask you to reach out to Kelly or Dean, say, hey, we see value in this, and to the degree that you're willing to chip in, into the pot, pass the hat, that'd be great. And then the second question was, should there be an effort to create a long-term, consistent funding flow for the maintenance and further development of FuzionView starting in 2026? Well, the thinking there is that, you've got the product up and running, but of course with any new thing that you come up with, there's always going to be community feedback on how things can be done better. And so the consensus of the leadership team was it'll take at least 1 to 2 years past the initial deployment to modify and improve FuzionView in response to community feedback. And those improvements and maintenance will be critical to acceptance. So there's also, the discussion is ongoing about at what places and how do we continue to fund and support those sorts of elements. And then if it is decided that funding past 2025 will be needed, what approach should be used? Well, in looking at it, the realistic things that are potentially available, they really boil down to these things here at the bottom. The need to position ourselves with a grant writer who's familiar with the greater utility community and potentially where there might be grants and how to reach out to achieve that. And then we're going to put a donation feature on the FuzionView website, which will enable that if someone wishes to donate to the cause, there's that capability. But we thought most critical, the leadership team thought most critical, was that getting that functional install up and operating at GSOC and, through, the one call uh, uh, process, that would do more than anything to help prime the pump for people to see the value of the effort and where it can go in the future and thus be willing to open up their wallets. So that's kind of what the thinking was on how we should approach this issue of funding. And then move on to legal and security. Um, as you've heard, if you've been in any of these past meetings and this more or less banter that's occurred, there has been from the very beginning a lot of concern about security. So some FOs are calling for highly punitive penalties for anyone caught misusing the system. Well, in trying to think about how we will be able to respond to that sort of an approach, the thinking was that, first of all, an FO can completely kick an offender out of the system, and that particular facility operator also has the potential for legal recourse. Beyond that, we're thinking we're the ability for us to wander into things like legislation and whatnot is not realistic at this point in time, or may never be realistic if we want this to be a volunteer system that is run in a way with there's some degree of honor in it. But if you are naughty, that there is a recourse and there is an ability to come back at that. Then question two was, is it possible to use FuzionView as a hack to download a facility operator's entire geospatial database? Well, if you think across the spectrum, that probably would be the single worst thing that could potentially happen in something like what has been developed here. But if you move over to the thinking about what the realities of how the system is being deployed, that should immediately become a non issue. It has tighter access than what OCC already has. It's a layered system. It's not FuzionView often operating by itself. FuzionView will be directly integrated into OCC's system. So you don't not only have to go through FuzionView, you also have to go through OCC, which the facility operators are already doing. Additionally, vetting paperwork needs to be in place before you get access. The facility operator has control, so it has its own IT defenses as well. And when you package that all together, it comes down to that last bulleted item. It would be easier to simply do a direct attack on a geospatial provider than trying to monkey around doing through OCC, then through FuzionView. So that's how the team came to look at that one. What organizations do we need to work with to ensure that there are no violations of recent law or policies? This is, again, a question that was often brought up in discussions that have gone on in the past. And so, just to give you a sense of the degree of the way this issue has been beat up, if you will, is there's already been a preliminary within the last 3 months. There's been a preliminary document review completed of the National Security Memorandum of Critical Infrastructure Security and Resilience that came out of the White House. We've looked in detail at sensitive security information, SSI, as issued by the Department of Transportation. We've looked at the 2013 National Infrastructure Protection Plan, NIP, if you wander in that world. And then we've gone in and looked at the sector risk management agencies by utility and looked at what their directives were and, looked at that. We've also looked at the NERC Critical Infrastructure Protection Plan, and we've dug through the DHS's cybersecurity stuff. I've personally done all of that and looked at it in detail. But let's get another opinion in this. And so right now there's a secondary review underway by GSOC Legal, and relative to the construct of FuzionView, we're getting a cybersecurity consult is planned for 425. We think we're watertight, but why not have somebody else come in and take a look at it? So that's in fact what we're going to do. So we hope that with these sorts of efforts and understandings of the circumstances, that it will be very clear going forward that we've done our homework to make sure that both from the legal and the security perspective, there aren't any open-ended issues. Then we wander on down to marketing, and later on in the flow of events today, Kelly will be working our way through abbreviated discussion and eliciting from you, input on kind of where the marketing plan stands, and but I'm going to give you three key points that I think will start priming the pump and maybe helping you think about things that will help support the discussion later on that Kelly will be offering. So, question one, what are the key elements of the sell message? In looking at this, after all of the input that we received from the large group and other folks as we went along in this, it kind of came down to thinking that there are themes, but they are specific to certain groups. Everybody looks at time savings as being something of value to them. If FuzionView will save them time in doing their work in the field, that needs to be something that we beat up as a marketing message. Then it comes down to the money and the return on investment and security. Well, that is the heartbeat, we believe, of how corporate facility operators look at this effort. And then it comes down to safety. Well, I don't mean to be sloppy in talking about, municipalities don't worry about money, but I think in the spectrum, safety is a bigger issue for a facility operator that's run by a city or county or whatever. And then excavators, obviously it's very important to them. So, what are some points of leverage? Kind of building, like if you think about the question one as being, the set of pans that you get on TV. Well, here comes the steak knives with question two. What are the points of leverage to encourage facility operator adoption? Well, we think they are being able to demonstrate we're solving a pain point, saves you time, helping others to refine their data. Through this process, over time, data fidelity is going to increase. And then the industry legislation is headed this way anyway. And the example would be the 2026 requirement to record all installs. So we're only trying to help facilitate and stay ahead of where things potentially can go. So, what are the points of leverage? There they are. Then question three comes down to how do we turn on the system to support marketing and adoption? Well, Barb's favorite line, I think, in all of the things she said in the past was before we do anything else, we got to release this to the design engineers because there's already a requirement out there for this sort of data to be provided to the design engineers when they request it. So this system gives us a much quicker way and streamlined way of being able to provide that. And then the second element there is go slow and do things in a methodical way. So that's a theme that you're going to hear repeated as as you hear further from others in the discussion today about the need to go slow and do this methodically to bring things online in a way that makes sense. Focus on the public sector facility operators first. Minneapolis, St. Paul, Bloomington, Rochester, Duluth, Mankato, and St. Cloud are considered our prime targets to try to get this thing up and rocking and rolling. And of course, as you've heard over the years, MnDOT's already, they're already arms deep in this. So, in that kind of combination, you start getting some real smack, if you will, on the ability to sell a story. And then with these last items, they're bullet points more than they were questions. And, they're about the insurance element piece here. Kind of a different perspective maybe than we were originally thinking. So, like for the first bullet, for the excavator, the cost is not the increased insurance rate or the fines and the settlement. The hammer isn't MinOps. The hammer is the downtime. Equipment lease payments while work stopped, crew wages after being sent home, the contractual project delay, so on and so forth. So that's a little bit different perspective than I think as we wandered into this project 4 years ago that we might have been thinking. The next bullet says the largest percentage of strikes are related to fail to mark or dug before marking. And we see eventually in the evolution of FuzionView as there being a way to facilitate that from happening. So this is an opportunity, we think, downrange to prevent that sort of scenario from playing out. And then last one is it was actually described as being a criminal type circumstance that all the data from directional boring is being tossed. It should be collected somewhere. And so, again, within this process that's been developed, we see that as another avenue for potentially making things better for the underground utility sector. MinOps takeaways. Well, there's no statutory requirement in Minnesota for any utility other than gas to report a dig-in incident to include electric, fiber, etc. They'll do it if they think it will enhance their legal position, but there's no requirement for that to happen. So our ability to tell the story in total is dampened down by that. And then when it came to abandoned infrastructure in general, not being recorded accurately, and if you think about it within workload, if something's going away and whatever, it's human nature to, well, it's there somewhere and we'll record it or whatever. But as of December 1st, 1999, abandoned pipelines, no other utility, abandoned pipelines must be recorded. And kind of the key thing to think about there is abandoned infrastructure is recorded locally. The state doesn't maintain a database of this information. It's an honor system. So there is real no way other than integrating directly into the database of a utility provider, and if they've actually recorded it, being able to see where abandoned infrastructure is. All right. The last thing I got for you here is other developments. You can see right here is kind of how we vision the rollout's going to, in general, occur. The last outreach, if you will, that this group is scheduled to do as it sits right now, and this is for the year 2025. And again, if you've looked at how many different events have gone on in the past, that was about socialization. We were out there big time. So Kelly, Adam, and Bob to present at the 2025 CGA conference on April 7 through 10. And then outreach begins changing from primarily socialization to implementation via one-on-one discussions. So that think of that as how this process is going to begin to mutate from developing a piece of software, telling the world we're developing a piece of software, and now making this sort of a move to actually implementing it. So initial drafts of the general information brochure, the decision maker document are completed. Their user agreements are in final draft. Adjustments are being made for how FuzionView is implemented by OCC. And again, it goes back to my comment earlier. We were originally thinking as we were developing things that FuzionView would live off by itself, but the reality is it's being actually incorporated directly in to the software suite, and Adam can talk more about that as we go forward. That's being run by OCC. So, the agreements have to be changed to accommodate that. And GSOC's going to stand up the formal marketing effort while the FuzionView website is going to transition to being more of a home just for the software, where you go to get technical information on the software, where you can download it, things of that nature. So that's how that piece of transition will take place. Let's see here. What did I miss? Got it. Um, and FuzionView documentation, online product documentation is essentially complete. Bob showed you that before, the features, how to use, etc. We are finishing up right now 5 PDF fact sheets that are nearing completion for the software, which will be downloadable on the FuzionView website. Frequently asked questions, technical specs, security overview, getting ready for FuzionView, and then connecting to FuzionView for the first time. And I've showed you example before, but we're cleaning things up to try to make a fact sheet, something that's a little bit more digestible. So this is in the rough draft right now with lots of opportunity for, as I said, there will be 5 of these different things. Other developments. Here's the last of these, and that's the federal funding situation. As you know, the current administration is trying to reel in the money that's been coming out of the federal government. One of the first steps that was made was to halt all grant funding. It threw a huge monkey wrench into the gears of our planning to how to think about things. Shared Geo took advantage of approximately advance. We had the opportunity during the court ordered executive order stay to under the contract we were authorized. ShareG was authorized to be able to take an advance of up to 50% of the grant. So a request was made, and we have in hand 48,000 of that, and that's to support the development of the uh, field data collect module. It is believed those funds are sufficient to complete a prototype of the software. That's the 48,000. And there's concern that either remaining funds won't be available. I had a call this morning with PHMSA, and they have more or less their sense of the circumstance as it sits right now, that the remaining funds will be available, but we need to be on a hustle to try to spend the that particular block of funding before the federal fiscal year starts off for 2026. In the past, it was easy enough to extend an additional year. We don't want to put ourselves in that position, but we're going to do everything we can to ensure the best opportunity to use money and also position ourselves, if we can extend it, to be able to do so. So that's why it says down below in the second to last bullet, we need to fast track the field data collect as much as possible. So there's going to be kind of a different flow in the timeline than we originally had planned. In sequence, the effort will be to get GSOC and OCC up and running with FuzionView. And as I've already described, we're very close to that. Then there will be a pivot largely to the field data collect effort to try to get that as far along as humanly possible, and then return to working on FuzionView open source release. So that's caused a change in the schedule. So initial software for the field data collect is complete, and that takes us to, I think, what is our last bullet, the near-term timeline. April 14th through the 17th CGA conference. May 16th ish, we're thinking FuzionView initial operating capability at OCC. June 1, FuzionView initial partners begin onboarding at OCC. Entirely dependent, and I defer to how Adam will describe that. But I just wanted to point as a point of reference, June 12th, large group meeting the next time we'll get together. So you should have a very good feel for where things are by June 12th. There should actually be software in place and the effort ongoing to try to bring on folks, depending on how OCC's doing and playing that out, but very close to that. And then we're thinking maybe final sign off on the OCC part somewhere on June 30th. As I indicated earlier, September 30th would be the end of the PHMSA funding for the field data collecting, and finally October 31st, FuzionView open source release-ish, somewhere in there. So again, for those of that have been tuned in, we are thinking more in the late June, early July timeframe for the open source release. But because of this pivot that we're having to do, we're thinking that's going to be put off. Um, and I think that is the extent of what I want to say. And it takes you over to Bob Bisquez. We're sloppy on schedule, but that's okay because I think there's some play in this as we go forward. Um, um, Bob, are you ready to take control and talk to people about Software Development's Pioneer Partners and the OCC handoff?
Um, so, based on the way that Steve's got the agenda items here, I'm going to talk a little bit before I get into this is the beginning of the CGA presentation that we're going to practice on you all with. But leading into that, on the software, kind of generally where the project is at right now, we're working with OCC and their technical points of contact on setting up the FuzionView engine inside of their network. So we've got the release candidate is installed and kind of working through some details on how they want to configure it for the OCC systems. And we're working through how to package up a production version of the FuzionView system and get it set up so that OCC is happy with what they end up with as far as the install goes. So that's kind of where the project is at this moment. Related to the, getting OCC up and running is the handoff of all the Pioneer partners. So we've got 5 partners right now that actually really amount to more like 8 or 9, but I'll explain myself here in a sec. We started out with the Glencoe area sample data set, down in Glencoe, which consisted of a bunch of data from Glencoe, but it wasn't everything from Glencoe. There's other data providers in Glencoe that have other data sets, but the data that we got out of the Glencoe area mostly came from Glencoe and their lighting folks as far as that those data sets are concerned. But we also got other data from different parties, some from the state of Minnesota, some from other local localities there that were part of they overlap the Glencoe area. So there's a bunch of different kinds of data sets that are included in the Glencoe area. So we're passing that stuff over to OCC. That's probably the biggest or longest list of different data sets that are available right now in the stuff that we're going to be handing over to OCC. Hutchinson is another city that we're working with, and the interesting piece to the Hutchinson side is that their data sets are all managed by a company called Logis. So Logis is actually working with us to connect up the Hutchinson data sets. That's going to help us out longer term with other entities that Logis manages. And I don't remember exactly how many entities they manage data for, but it's a few of them in the state of Minnesota. Eden Prairie is another one. Both Hutchinson and Eden Prairie are using a tokenized Esri server. So we're working through the details of setting up that token requesting process. That's actually being worked on as I'm talking to you by the development group. So they're finalizing the details of how that token requester is going to work, so that it'll all be automated for the connections to those two services. We're working with the city of St. Paul, and this is where that expansion on the number of data providers comes in. City of St. Paul, we're working with is Public Works, but they have different data providers internally for different data sets. So we're working with Public Works, which would do pretty much like all of the lighting, any kind of thing that had to do with right-of-way permitting, those kinds of things. but there's also a sewer section inside of Public Works. And then there's different departments like Parks, which has their own underground infrastructure, as well as water, which is another department in the city. Each one of those entities has their own data providers. So in effect, when we pass over this stuff over to OCC, those are going to be other entities that we're going to have to hand over to OCC as far as this Pioneer Partner data management stuff gets passed over to OCC. And then the last one is MnDOT. We've got two data providers that are already handing us data from MnDOT already. One of them is for their intelligent transportation systems. And then there's another one, we're getting their hydraulic data as well, which is basically underwater or underground piping. And then there's a process in place right now where they're going to be grouping up a bunch of folks that are separate data providers inside the state that we're going to be doing a presentation to, and those will also be added into the list that we're going to be passing over to OCC. So that's kind of where the OCC handoff is at right now at the project level. And I'll let Adam kind of follow up on what I just said here with the implementation and the future developments.
Sure. From what I'm seeing on my side, by the end of April, we will be ready to fully run OCC tickets through the system and link outside to the FuzionView system. So the difference there between the final stage and where we'll be at the end of April is that the actual FuzionView engine will be running on a server owned and operated by Shared Geo. By the end of Q2, which you and Steve both have outlined, our expectation is to have that fully running contained within the OCC system. In fact, I think John is very close. He's working with Jim, the developer on the Shared Geo side, to finalize some of the last elements of the release candidate for full implementation into our system. So minus a handful of bugs that they're working through, that's pretty darn close. I would say that 99% is accurate at this point based on what we're seeing on our side. That next step will also include, as you mentioned, Bob, onboarding members, testing the delivery of the ticket link, testing their access through the link, testing the access controls that are put in place to restrict who can see that data and what they can see. We'll also be, through that process, identifying who those people are that access should be provided to. One of the things that we'll talk about in the presentation for CGA are the controls that allow the facility operators to decide who is going to be able to see their data and what data they'll be able to see. To date, no one has identified who they're going to share that data with. So that's one of the big steps that we have to work through, is identifying who the partners will be for that testing phase on the excavator and design engineer side, and who they'll allow to have access through the system. And lastly, we're working really at the early stages because we need the final version in place before we can get really deep into it. But we're creating videos, training materials, handouts, and things like that that we'll use for training and onboarding new users of the system, and also to help with marketing and outreach efforts. That cover everything you were looking for, Bob, Steve?
Yes, I think so. I did. There might be one sentence I would throw in there is that we've got like a near-term transition piece and a longer term. You already mentioned it a little bit, but I wanted to make sure that it was clear that the near-term version is that connection into the existing demo server that we've got right now. The longer term, everything will be over in the OCC side. You did say that, but that's a two-step process that we already got scheduled and it's ready to go kind of thing. So.
Yep. And for this group, the reason behind that, the reason that we want to bring that in and embed it in the local center is one, so that there isn't an outside dependency on Shared Geo in the long term, but also to prove out the concept for other one-call centers that'll be looking to do integration. And ultimately building it inside our system allows for a more seamless experience for the user. They're not going to perceive it as leaving one system and going to another. It's all going to be fully integrated. They'll see it as a single platform that they're interacting with. And it also makes things with like conditioning, setting up the conditional access. It makes that a lot easier, tying the access points both for facility operators and excavators into the existing credentialing system that we use today. So that's probably the way most one-call centers are going to want to do implementation. And this will prove that out for other open source participants as well.
Thank,
Okay.
thank you,
Oh,
gentlemen. Go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
Okay. And uh, great summations. Thank you, gentlemen. Takes us down to um, you've heard them once, you get to hear them again. Adam and Bob will now wander on through what the project CGA presentation is going to look like. And with that, Bob, I'm going to stop the share. You can grab it again, and away we go.
Okay. You want me to kick it off, Bob?
Yeah, hang on a sec.
Okay.
Oh, am I sharing already?
You are.
You are.
Oh, cool.
You're on the slide.
All right, I didn't stop anything. So, I was going to say though, the next two items on Steve's agenda are actually going to be combined into this one step. So, at the end of this, towards the end of this presentation, I'll be talking about the field data collect stuff, just as he has described. So, it's a
Perfect.
two for one. We'll get you out of here quicker.
So we're using this as a dress rehearsal, if you will, and I think I'm playing the role of Kelly today. But I will sort out who's doing what at the CGA conference. So, a lot of this is going to be redundant for those of you that have been around watching this project unfold. I'll keep it high level. If you do have any questions, feel free to dive in at any time. Don't wait till the end. You can interrupt as we go, and we'll work through it while we still got the slides up. And you can move us forward, Bob.
Didn't know how to do it first.
Okay. So we've talked a lot about the long-term outcomes and what the goals are. Ultimately, the number one objective of this project is to increase safety, to help to make the excavation activities in the states where this tool is entered or provided as safe as absolutely possible. We know that there are other priority level impacts that we'll have on things like efficiency and cost reduction. But the number one objective is to make things as safe as possible for the excavators and for the facility operators that are interacting with the system. The goal or the way that we want to accomplish that is by generating high quality GPS-based maps that are accessible to excavators that are interacting with the system. Brad, were you trying to chime in? Might have just been background. Okay. We will control access to that data by ensuring that users are accredited and approved for access by the facility operator providing the information. So the whole system is closed in essence and is only available by invitation. Now, there may be some facility operators and data providers that say it's okay to share my data with anyone that wants to access it. But in reality, I think they'll be a little bit more restrictive in the beginning, at least. Enrolling this out to engineering firms and excavators that they're familiar with, that they already have a relationship with, and then opening that up over time to additional users. The one thing you're going to hear me say a lot during this discussion is that this is a supplement for the one call process. None of this is intended to be a replacement for the existing 811 center or the processes handled in the center. It's meant to improve and enhance the interaction with the users, but not offer an alternative to the user agreements that have been put out, the marketing materials, everything emphasizes that point because it's very important that users understand that this does not substitute for their requirements under the state one call laws. They still have to file a locate request. They still have to go through the same processes that the law requires. This just provides them access to additional data. Go ahead, Bob. So we're showing here a very high level overview of a display that an excavator would see after they have submitted a locate request. As I mentioned, the locate process is the control. One of the ways that we've ensured that people don't try to use this as a substitute for submitting a ticket is to make the ticket the first step in accessing any of the data that we provide. What you can see here on the screen with the gray dotted or the black dotted outline is an excavation entity that was submitted to the one call center. So in this case, they've identified that their excavation is taking place within the boundaries of this polygon. Because they have a ticket submitted now and they're an approved user that the facility operators have agreed to share data with, When they go into the ticket, they'll have a link that they can click that'll take them right into a view showing the actual location of the underground facilities. In this case, we have multiple facility types. We've got what appears to be electric in the red running through the area. We've got the communications cables that are running through the area in orange. And we also have data points that the facility operators have shared for things like pedestal locations or pole locations that are supplemental data provided to the excavator as well. We talked about the fact that there has to be an agreement in between each. Those agreements are being developed by our great fearless leader, Dean Parker, and his firm to ensure that they are bulletproof and that they explain expectations and set the rules for the use of this data very clearly for everyone that's involved. And again, I think Bob or Steve mentioned this previously, but if at any time someone is violating those agreements, it's really just the click of a button to turn off their access. So they have to stay in compliance. If at any point we suspect they are not, or have any indication that they are not, we can retract that access. We can do that through the system ourselves, or they can do it through the administrative tools that are provided through the system. In fact, if they really wanted to, they could go so far as to just turn off the web service that they're sharing to the center, and that would immediately kill all access to their data for any user. So they have a lot of control throughout the process to make sure that the data is being used the way that they intend for it to be used. As mentioned previously, the pilot system was completed in October of 2022. We started doing beta work in 2024, and we are now at the point where we are getting ready to test the final version of the system. MnDOT, as Bob mentioned, is going to be one of the first pioneer partners, as well as 5 other municipalities. I think this is really worth mentioning the importance of this. Having MnDOT as a pioneer partner is huge because there are really only a handful of utility companies across a state that receive a large majority of the tickets, and the DOT is one of those. They're going to be notified on a very high percentage of locates. By having them as a pioneer partner, that means we're going to have a large number of tickets that contain data. If we start out with the pioneer partners and we have very restricted areas where the data is available, there will be a lot of tickets where there isn't facility operator data available to be shown during the beta, which defeats some of what we're trying to accomplish. So having a big partner like this is going to be a big success for the program. So really excited to see them coming on board.
Hey, Andrew, this is Brad. Quick question.
Sure.
Interesting picture that you show up here because it's one location, but it's a whole bunch of different utilities. So what kind of a problem is that going to create for you?
You mean with having some not sharing data and having some that are sharing data?
Well, very simply, accuracy. And I'll give you here's one example I found out this week. Probably the number one state, or excuse me, probably the number one city, asset management progress-wise in the entire state, just found out in the last week they don't even have the Z on their underground sewer lines, the entire city.
Mm-hmm.
And they're probably the most mature asset management organization in the state.
Mm-hmm.
So if you get my point here, you might have good data on one of those utilities, but the probability on all of them might be a little lower is a reaction.
One of the ways that we're addressing that is by allowing the users to identify the accuracy and quality of the data. Bob, I cannot remember off the top of my head what the different categories were that we were using. But essentially, Brad, we're breaking this down to specify, is this GPS data? Is this, expected to be an accurate representation? Is this hand drawn from an as-built that's been passed on, and it's, for informational purposes only? All of it's for informational purposes only, but the accuracy obviously influences how you utilize that information. So by communicating to the end user what the perceived or what the reported quality is of that data, we help to negate some of those challenges. But ultimately, it is up to the user to decide, how much of an assumption they want to make based on the data that they've been provided. Go ahead, Bob. If you wanted to expand on that.
Just the one clarifying statement there is GPS is bad. Don't say GPS.
Yes. Can't say GPS. Sorry. You're right.
The reason that I say that is that
Why is GPS bad? Come on.
It means a
GPS can
lot of
be-
different
It
things.
can be two or three. Well, we identified 3 different modes of GPS. It could be survey quality GPS. It could be phone level GPS. Blah blah blah. What we did is we used a classification system that is very human readable. Is it better than a foot? Is it less than a meter? That kind of thing. So those are the kinds of classifications that we used for providing the data providers to classify their data. They can do it either by the whole data set that they contribute or at the feature level so.
Maybe I'll do a follow-up question right now. Steve was talking at about 800 miles an hour, so I honestly didn't exactly absorb everything he said, but I heard him say Minneapolis, Rochester, and I don't know, 4 or a couple other agencies. What was that? What was the context of that? Were you going to roll it out first in Minneapolis and Rochester, or what was the point that was being made?
I think the preference there was that those would be the target ones to start with, or try to get those in early.
Okay.
As data providers as well, right, Bob? So
Yep.
those are people we expect will be providers of data during the initial pioneer partner phase.
Okay. Bob illustrated one of the issues is going to be it isn't just one part of that organization that's going to supply the data. It's a lot of them. So
yeah, and that's that originally I thought that's what you were asking was how does this work when there's a few providers that are sharing data and others that are not, and the answer there is they'll be provided whatever data we have access to.
Okay.
But they're still following the one call process, so the other facilities can respond in other ways as well.
Okay, good. Thanks, guys. Good work.
Bob, you can go to the next slide. So this is a breakdown. I'm not going to take you guys through the full path, but we will have this up for the CGA presentation and we'll give them a detailed rundown just to remind everybody how the process works. In essence, high level, the data request starts at the one call center, is passed to the FuzionView engine. From the FuzionView engine, it reaches out to the facility operator who has shared data. It pulls in the data from that facility operator and then distributes it out to the engineering teams, the locating teams, and the excavators in the field. Bob is actually going to give you more detail later on about the big L-shaped arrow that comes off of engineering, locating, and excavation and goes back, or I'm sorry, not excavation, but the first two, and goes back to the utility GIS database. That's what we're calling the field data collection, and he'll spend some time on that.
Yeah, actually, this slide needs to be updated. I think there are going to be instances where excavation teams will provide data as well. So
it's possible. Okay. So we've talked about the development strategy to date, which was obviously to develop the FuzionView core engine, establish the pioneer partners, which we're working through now, to work through the process and identify opportunities for enhancements, to test our documentation, our authentication processes, and to make sure that everything is functioning as expected. Work on the field markup and comment service, which Bob will explore more. And then, Bob, you mentioned here that there was built-in support for 3D visualizations. Do you want to touch on that at all?
The data and schema design behind the scenes in FuzionView from day one was set up so that it could handle 3D information. We are concentrating right now on 2D perspectives. We're not trying to really stress that whole vertical side of things because most of the data sets that are provided to us are all in 2D. But we are, and I'll talk a little bit about it in the field data collection side of it. We're working towards obviously moving into 3D at some point. So there'll be like maybe a 2D or 2.5D to 3D kind of thing transition. But that's where, we've got design ideas for pushing in that direction.
I thought that was important to note because Brad, you mentioned the depth data, and we don't expect a lot of people to be providing depth data early on. I think that's pretty common. Very few people are maintaining that in their GIS databases, but we are setting the system up so that can be utilized down the road. Or if people do have access to that data and want to share it, it will be functional. Right, Bob?
Correct.
Okay, next slide. So how does it work? Everything, as I mentioned, flows through the one call center. So essentially the center is the control. You can only ever see data within the excavation area that you have submitted through the one call system. So until you submit that polygon, there isn't going to be any data that is visible to a user. Once they submit the ticket, they'll receive a link back on the ticket that will take them to any available data displayed for any facility operators that are sharing. We intend to filter that so that we don't show that link if there isn't data available in the area of excavation, since we can do that cookie cutter check when we have this fully implemented into our system. We'll run that in advance so that we're not sending people there if there isn't going to be anything for them to view. If there is data for them to view, they'll be dropped into the ticket link, and they'll be able to see the full map, any available data within the area that they've submitted for excavation. Next slide, Bob. So here's a view of what that looks like. So this user went through the one call center. They submitted the excavation area outlined in the dotted line. Actually, they submitted the solid line. We add a 100-foot buffer just to expand out and show them anything that's right outside that excavation area. We consider that valuable because they're, some folks, when they're giving this outline, they're drawing very tight in our system, potentially a route that is exactly down the road right of way. And we want to be able to give some warning, if you will, if there is something nearby or just outside that entity. So by providing a buffer, we expand that out a little bit, and you can actually see on the bottom of this polygon that there's an electric line showing. If we had only displayed the data right up to the excavation entity that they had drawn, there would be no communication that right outside that box is an electric facility. So it's kind of a nice warning to the excavator that there are things outside of what you've identified as your excavation area. You need to stay within that area. If you expand outside of that, you're taking a risk, and you're risking running into new facilities. And in this case, again, we're displaying the communication lines in orange. We have electric lines in red, and then we've got two different indicators. I believe one was for a pedestal and one was for an above ground connection. So that is data that the facility operator decides what they'll share and how they'll share it. But they have the ability to not only share centerline data for their facilities, but to also identify features that are important to them that could be valuable to excavators, locators, and engineers in the field.
One item of note on this particular shot is the dashed line that actually indicates things that were marked as abandoned.
Oh, thank you, Bob. That's great. And we do allow the user, as you can see here, to select those lines and get additional information about that attribute. So this would be a place where, they could identify that this was an abandoned facility. In this case, they're identifying it as a communication cable, a conduit. It's copper. It's owned by CenturyLink. It's part of the demo Glencoe trial area that we have listed. And it gives the ticket number and the date that it was filed. So they're not just seeing the lines, they're able to dive down a layer deeper and understand what it is that we're showing them in that excavation area. Go ahead, Bob. So I think we've kind of beat this one to death. The control is entirely in the hands of the facility operators. The facility operators will decide who can see it and what they can see. They can turn that on and off through the one call center or themselves at any time. There is no requirement that they share data or requirements on what data they share. This system is being made available on a total voluntary basis, and we will handle the restrictions on who can see that data on the back end of the system. Next slide, Bob. So as we talked about the Pioneer Partners process, we said we want to go slow. We want to use the tortoise mentality. Slow and steady wins the race. We want to introduce users. We want to collect feedback. We want to identify test cases and scenarios where we can explore the process further in a controlled environment, and then invite and bring in other potential users over time. So we don't, bring in a lot of people, find a small roadblock that ends up discouraging people to use the system and delays the onboarding process. We want to bring them on in stages and work with those partners that understand this is a new process and want to give feedback and help us to develop and enhance the system over time. From there, we'll also be working on the marketing and outreach, continuing to get people comfortable with the idea and share feedback from the users. We've identified some potential partners in the energy area, which we think will be very helpful in influencing people to give this a try. A lot of people are going to be looking for someone who is in a similar stakeholder group to themselves to see how they like the system and what their experience is and what their comfort levels are before they take the dive. So as we collect that feedback, we'll be using that to feed marketing and education and outreach for new users that we're bringing in. Go ahead, Bob. And I know I said I was going to take 13, but I'll give it back to you because I think I've beat that pony to death. The moral of the story is it has to go through the one call system, so you're not going to be able to bypass the requirements under the law.
Yeah, so this is my section where I jump in and talk about FuzionView. You've probably seen some of these slides before. I've updated a few of them here and there, but this section has been condensed quite a bit for the presentation in CGA in lieu of, we're going to start talking and more about our focus on the field data collection side of things. But as we've already discussed here a couple times, the FuzionView engine is all about augmenting the existing process. There's nothing that we're trying to replace with the FuzionView development that's already in place. So it's not about changing it. It's about adding more information. So the first part of the FuzionView side of the equation is that, you've got this ticket viewer that is able to go into the FuzionView services and actually pull the data out so that you can see the particular information that's available. Adam's already gone through this in some detail, but this actually shows you the whole interface, and you can see that there are different kinds of things that you can do. There's layer management pieces, there's a metadata button, there's a scale here. The idea here is that this is useful for both the people that are running on the desktop as well as the folks that are running out in the field on a mobile device. So we designed everything from day one to be mobile compatible. The idea is they're mobile friendly. Everything that you're able to do inside of the ticket viewer interface, you can do out on a mobile device with a touch interface. So that's like that ticket viewing side of the things. There's also this facility operators interfaces or services that are behind the scenes. It remains to be seen, and Adam can jump in here wherever he wants to about how much of this is going to be accessible through their system. But the FuzionView engine allows for access for the data providers, the people sharing, or the entities that are sharing information with the FuzionView engine on accessing their information related to what data was pulled from the with the FuzionView engine from their services. So they'll have a dashboard map where it'll show all of the tickets that are in play that actually pulled data from their systems. So they'll have a dashboard map interface. They'll also have a tabular interface similar to this, where they can actually click on the particular tickets, and you can see how many features were pulled in for a particular ticket in that last column there. They'll also have a interface where they can actually list out all of the data sets that they're sharing with the FuzionView engine. You're going to have a view option, editing option. You can actually set up the third icon there with the map on it. It actually allows you to set up a area coverage or coverage area for your particular data set through this management interface. It can also be provided as a data set, so they can share a service from their server that delineates where the edges of their coverage area are if they wanted to do it that way. But you could also draw it in through this system, and then obviously you can set up a particular layer to delete it. There's also an option in here for actually enabling it and disabling a layer. So you can actually have all of the connection information in place, and you can disable a layer at will, basically, with the FuzionView system. There's also going to be a hamburger menu up here on the top. This will allow all of the data managers to get into the documentation, all of the features that they have control over, everything that I've been showing you here with the different types of data that they're sharing. And then they also have options for adding new data sets. This literally is the form that is required to add a new data connection to the FuzionView server. So there's only these 6 fields with a couple of configuration things on the bottom, whether or not it's enabled or not. And then there's also an option for caching a whole data set. So if they don't want to necessarily have a service on their end, it could be a cache data set that is stored on the FuzionView server as a copy. So there's an option for doing that as well. They also have controls over, I don't have a shot of that, but they also have the option of showing which data or data users are enabled to see their particular data sets. So there's another option in there for doing that as well. So they'll be able to enable or disable particular entities based on the them signing off on their agreements for the data usage agreements that they're presented with when they sign in or sign up for using the FuzionView side of things. So then that's the data providers section there. And then this next piece here is basically what the operators, so the OCC side of the equation, so Adam's group, would see basically everybody's stuff with the idea that they can go in there and help them troubleshoot connections and that kind of stuff. So they have a one level above individual data providers view into the FuzionView system, along with a bunch of system settings as well. So, okay, so that's kind of where we're at now. Now we're starting to get into, we're just winding down on the FuzionView engine and getting the stuff that I've already described into its final stages and getting ready to hand it off to OCC. This next piece I'm going to talk to you about is the next phase of the FuzionView development. And this is field data collection. So think about this as an extension for FuzionView. It's going to be loosely coupled to FuzionView in that anything that is collected from the field related to a ticket is going to be bound to that ticket ID. So anything that comes up the stream, we've been talking about the FuzionView engine here for the last 2 years about all of the data being shared from the data providers down out to the field. Field data collection will go in the other direction. The idea being that any data that needs to be collected up out in the field, and I'll go through the different types here in a minute, we're going to be working on passing that information back upstream and presenting the data in a fashion that will be able to be linked to from inside of the OCC systems. It still remains to be seen on how this is going to be managed long term, but what we're working on right now is just the enablement of a conduit from the field back up to the data providers, at least to the point where the data providers can see the data and they can do what they want with the data that comes back up out of the field related to a particular ticket. So I've been talking about FuzionView. This is the way it is right now. We've got the FuzionView engine, the ticket viewer. We got some map services behind the scenes that are being used for backgrounds and some of the overlays that are actually being drawn right out of the database of the data that's inside of FuzionView, those kinds of things. That's where FuzionView is at right now. And what we're going to be doing is adding this field data collection, a set of tools that are called the field data collection project at this point. We may need to rename that and make it a little bit more attractive, but we're calling it FTC for right now. Like I said, it's going to be loosely coupled to the FuzionView engine. So this is a ticket view right now. And the idea is that we're going to have a set of tools that'll be added in for the field users. So there's going to be a different interface that the field users will have access to that are related to a particular ticket. So they're going to think of the user active planning history with a map. Think of that as the engineering side of the equation, where they want to be able to see a history of areas where they've actually gone and done tickets that are intended for engineering or planning. Another one would be the user active dig history. So this would be from the excavator's perspective. Same kind of deal. They want to see where they've dug already. They may have dug right next to where they're digging now, or they want to be able to see the history and go back in time and see where they've actually had excavations that they've managed and completed. A couple other tools. We've already got the download of the ticket feature data inside of the ticket viewer, but we also want to be able to build a tool for uploading things from the field. Could be a photo of something that they discovered. It could be something related to they want to describe something, or even there may be mechanisms for asking questions. It could be data that is captured from different kinds of devices out in the field as they're doing their locates. So the newer versions of hardware that collect data now collect the data in much higher level, with a much higher level of accuracy than the locators are going out into the field with to begin with. So the idea is that we can pull up as much of that data as we can and present it to all of the data providers that are sharing data with FuzionView, so they can see this stuff coming back upstream, and they can claim it and pull it back into their systems if desired. A couple other tools here. One would be for doing the damage reporting. So maybe we want to get into doing the dirt reporting, pre-formatting some things, and getting it kind of all packaged up so that it's much easier to do a damage report. Requesting a new dig ticket, basically out in the field, being able to do kind of digital white lining with a map, either draw it on a map or actually walk out in the field and trace where you're walking, so that you've got a mechanism to draw the polygon out in the field, to request a new dig ticket and pass that through. And then also a button for saying, all right, I'm done with my excavation, or I'm done with my locate. So the idea would be that the information from the field, based on a particular user out in the field, they can actually click a button and say that they're done with what they need to do out in the field. So this is kind of your grab bag of tools that we're going to be adding on. This came out of our needs assessment. This is the list that was deemed fairly important by our expert, which is another leadership member. His name is Travis. He helped us put this list together. This is our first blast at it, but this is where we're at right now with the tool bag that we're going to be putting together. And what I've kind of done here from the project perspective is group these tools up based on the types of users that I know exist. So we've got that excavator, the engineer, a locator, and then another one grouping that's kind of come out in recent conversations is emergency response. So there's a short list here of potentially having another user type called, we're going to call them a responder or emergency response type of user. But the idea here is that each one of these groupings will have a different set of tools available to them for their particular tasks. So what you end up with is, we've got that original green FuzionView environment, and now we're going to have all these other tools that are going to be part of the field data collection tool set. So these are the things that we're going to start focusing on. We've got this kind of two-stage development thing that I already talked about earlier in the meeting here about near term. We're going to be doing a real course enablement of just pulling any information up out of the field. And then the second phase will be going in and kind of attacking the tools very individually and in detail and fleshing them out to where it makes sense for the end users in the field. That's where I'm going to end. That's where I've got the ending right now. I think there's probably going to be a few more slides that we'll put together with Kelly and Adam for, kind of walking out of the conversation as far as the presentation goes in CGA. But I think that's where we're at right now with the presentation that we're going to do at CGA. So any questions?
Hey, Brad, I got a couple. Can you go back? Either you mentioned or Steve mentioned Eden Prairie and Hutchinson. So remind me again, what is it that they will be providing to this initiative?
Eden Prairie is going to give Eden Prairie and Hutchinson are both sharing their data, their underground data with the system. So all of their underground data that they have available in digital form, they'll be sharing.
Let me ask the question a little differently then. You said all of their underground data that they have in digital format. Well, do you know what percent that is of all of their underground data?
No, we're not. That's not something that we're currently tracking. I don't know if that's.
Well, I mean, do you have a ballpark? Do you think it's 20%, 50%, or?
I have no idea.
No idea.
I don't. The piece of that makes that important is knowing that we've got access, or we've communicated with all of their potential data providers, because they can have different data providers inside the same organization.
Okay.
I can tell you right from experience, there's 3 different data providers just in public works at St. Paul. They all manage their own data sets.
Hey, out over in Minneapolis, there's a lot more than that, Bob.
Yeah, I know there's going to be organized. MnDOT, I'm a little worried about MnDOT, to tell you the truth. There's going to be a few there too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a question. I think that's significant that you have them participating. I was just wanted to kind of a clarification. What is it or how are they participating? So
Yep.
I have a question, Bob.
Sure.
Is there any export feature on this where you would be able to export any of that data?
Yeah, but it's only going to, there's a mechanism for downloading the data. We worked that in very early on, but it's also going to be authenticated. You have to have a user account in the system before you'll have any access to downloading anything.
Well, downloading into FuzionView, but if I wanted to export data out of FuzionView from, is that a feature?
Yes, for a
It
particular
is.
ticket. Yeah, for a particular ticket, you'll be able to, any of the information that you see on the ticket in that ticket viewer,
Uh-huh.
when you get to the point of seeing a ticket like this,
Yeah.
there's an option in here for downloading all of the features. So the electric and the conduit lines that you see on this particular map, there's an option in there for downloading that data, but you have to have a login into the system to be able to do it.
Okay, so that would be tracked on, like if somebody exported Lumen data,
Mhm.
they didn't work for Lumen, you know,
Correct. Yep.
right?
As a
And that would be traceable or,
Adam, that's kind of rolling over to your side.
and as a point of clarification, isn't it correct that that downloading feature was to apply only to design or planning tickets, not to
Correct.
activation?
okay.
Correct.
So they won't have access to download unless they're provided that link. If they click that link, once that's built in provision, then we would know that they did that. That would be an action within the system that was tracked.
Okay.
So
Okay.
It's set up as an opt-in right now. In other words, somebody has to say, yes, you have access to that. It's not on by default.
Okay. Okay.
But by default, we track basically every action within the system. We consider that data very valuable, especially for like future enhancement development. So any actions they take within the system, we'll be able to record.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
And Liz, further to that, we are looking for input from Lumen and other stakeholders as to whether there ought to be certain limits either in the software or by business rules of the notification center as to whether there ought to be volume limits or size limits on the ticket as to when FuzionView beyond which FuzionView won't share data. Again, just as a backstop to prevent it from being used for non-underground damage prevention purposes. But we'll be looking for some thought leadership from you on that.
Yeah, one of the things that kind of concerns me is, once they place a ticket but the ticket isn't, they're not good to dig yet, but they have a ticket. So then, excavators are getting antsy because they don't want to wait for the ticket to be good. And they pull up FuzionView and they're like, well, it looks like we're okay. Let's go ahead and dig before their ticket is good.
One of the thoughts there, which is still under debate, is on an excavation ticket, should FuzionView even respond with that data prior to the start date and time on the excavation ticket?
I agree. Yes, I agree.
And a lot of private facility operators are giving us feedback to the effect that, yes, they want that. Now, on the other side of it, some excavators are saying, look, we want that information early because we often go out and do our own verification, either by locate or, vac truck or otherwise, and we need that information before the start date and time on the ticket. So we're going to need more advice from our stakeholders on that to sort that through.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's just a few bad apples.
Right.
Mostly all the excavators are just trying to, do their job and all that. But there's a few bad apples out there that would, take advantage, possibly. So, that is a concern. So, um, yeah.
Well, we'll
Okay.
definitely discuss that with you further.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank
And
you.
you can give Chris Anderson an earful on what your thoughts are too, so he has them.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
Any other questions?
There was a question that was in the chat area, and I think maybe that one probably ought to be fielded either by Dean or Kelly. We got an inquiry about how an organization other than WSB, as an engineering firm, particularly one that's already doing a lot of business with MnDOT, how they can get involved.
Oh my gosh, I lost my mute button for a second. So apologies. One of the things we're going to talk about next was some outreach we've already done to firms like WSB. We actually sat down with them a couple weeks ago to talk through not only broadening the network and talking to more people about getting more operators in the system, making sure we're populating data, but also from the test phase perspective of trying to bring in a few select projects and or entities that could use this process from the beginning to the end before we really kind of go broad with it across the state. And so we're having those conversations with WSB now, but also thinking about how to expand that net in the next few weeks as well.
Well, what I'm thinking, Kelly, that might be a perfect segue into your time slot.
Yes,
Should
perfectly
we
timed.
should we keep going?
Sure. So
right.
this was going to be an informal discussion, but really wanted to give people a sense of how we're thinking about moving this forward and then maybe get some feedback on that strategy. So first and foremost, we're working from the perspective of GSAC to implement FuzionView through the GSAC system through OCC and looking at how we can brand that system more broadly as a GSAC entity and key to our work here. And so we're developing that branding now, and we're developing materials to conduct outreach to all folks in the industry about this project, but in particular the key audiences that are going to participate in this on a daily basis. And so that is underway. Secondly, we are looking at, I think, what Barb referred to as kind of a web strategy, where we're looking at certain key contacts in the industry that we have that are part of this group, where we can, test out the system, right? Making sure we're using it in places where we know the data is there, being able to try out a project from beginning to end, especially from the design phase and then also from the excavation phase. And utilizing that time and those experiences to generate feedback on improving the system in ways that we can do that in an easy format in the next few months, as we both roll it out from the OCC and GSAC perspective, but then as we bring more people onto the system later on. So that kind of net strategy is focused on kind of key folks. One is the design engineering community like WSB, but we definitely want to expand that. One is contractor community, the kind of municipality community, anchored by Hutchinson, but also recognizing that they use Logis, which represents a bunch of different municipalities in Minnesota. And then MnDOT, of course, working with them directly to actually kind of look at a project from beginning to end and say where we can do this, how is it working from the facility operator standpoint and from the design aspect. And then I think those were kind of the major constituencies that we're looking at. But the idea is to get more contacts, to reach out to folks individually, particularly as we kind of broaden out who might be most interested in participating and providing that data at the outset, which tends to be municipalities. And then also kind of talking to what I found talking to people around the state about this is this kind of like verification from the perspective of associations that people are involved in or part of. So looking at meeting with the counties, municipality groups, the cities, those associations where we can actually just say, hey, you know, if you've heard about this and your association knows what's going on, I think that's really helpful. So that folks can go to those associations and actually say, you know, tell me more about this. What have you learned about that? So that's kind of the strategy that we're going about now. And it's definitely our hope in the next few weeks is to start actually, once this is live with OCC and GSAC, we're going to actually start doing that testing and kind of a slow roll outreach and a slow roll like testing phase, and then continuing to do that outreach a little bit faster as time goes on and as the system starts kind of moving forward. So the question that we had for you all was really just thinking about, you know, how and do folks have feedback on that strategy, and, you know, what other audiences or people or contacts should we be looking at to expand the reach of this product once we're moving forward?
So Kelly, I've put up on screen the stakeholders list that the leadership team had identified. And while you were talking, I also had up some of the additional marketing ideas that, you know, had been out there about Shared Geo would develop the technical to the degree that they're needed, but since the OCC implementation will be the OCC implementation, that the training video piece would be done by them, those sort of supporting elements. So I think you all, one of the things that you were interested in doing here was seeing, does anybody have any additional groups that they thought ought to be added and to the stakeholders list? And just to jump ahead a little bit, there's also a partners list, and then there's also a development community ambassadors and state and federal government. So I'll move back to your stakeholders list and leave that up, and then of course the idea that you just floated there about, does your marketing strategy make sense about how you're going to go forward?
Yeah, thank you. This was the, you know, obviously this is the group of associations that we've identified, as mentioned, Steve mentioned. So, you know, Public Works Association, the counties, sign firms, Logis, townships, the CAER Association, MnDOT. We've talked about the Department of Health, who's doing lead pipe projects, obviously, DNR, and Minnesota Geospatial Information Office. Which is always a mouthful. I feel like I say that 100 times a day due to the new law changes. Um, and League of Cities, Municipalities, Rural Electric Association, Rural Water Association, you know, American Society of Civil Engineers and Wastewater Operators Association, etc. So I'm kind of curious, from the perspective of associations or other stakeholders that people know of or think would be a good idea, if there's anything to add to that list.
From a municipal utility standpoint, I noticed one that was missing. Regulatory agencies for municipal water systems is the Minnesota Department of Health. You have that one on your list. The regulatory agency for sanitary sewer is the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and that's not on the list.
Okay, that's a good add. Thank you. Anybody else?
I think we actually have them down further on the list as a partner, because the Clean Water Council actually gave us an endorsement, but definitely a stakeholder. We'll add them. Should we move on, Kelly?
I think so. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Here we've got a list of potential partners. So Society of Civil Engineers, again, Common Ground Alliance, which we've been talking to throughout this process, obviously, the Infrastructure Protection Coalition, a Land Improvement Contractors of America, National Utility Contractors Association, National Utility Locators Contractors Association, North American Telecommunications Damage Prevention Council, Planet Underground Power and Communication Contractors Association, and the Subsurface Utility Engineering. These are all very long titles. Subsurface Utility Engineering Association. And I would just add too, we've talked to the Minnesota Communications, Cable Communications Association as well, and they're very interested in getting more involved in this. So anything to add there? Here we have a list of community ambassadors. I think if folks want to be on this list, let us know. But obviously Travis from Subsurface Solutions, Dave Hunstead, Kevin Maxa from Austin Utilities, who I believe is retiring soon. Frank Schill from WSB, Tricia Stefanski from MnDOT, and Paul Tyker from Utility Logic. Obviously, we have the state and federal government here in terms of MinOps, MPCA, and the Clean Water Council, and PHMSA. In terms of community ambassadors or state and federal government, anything to add there?
We need some volunteers.
Yeah.
We need ambassadors.
We'll start calling people. So
there was the demand for the 3 to 5 slide presentation thing to be able to pop in their event, presentations so that they could make a pitch for us now and then. So that's really all we're thinking about. Well, I don't want to say all, but community ambassador, if you're willing to help in the project, would be great to know. So keep in mind. What else, Kelly?
I think that's it. Just any other general feedback, or folks, feel free to reach out separately if you have ideas about who to reach out to and to talk more about this project.
Okie dokie. Are there any additional comments, announcement, or other business? So the floor is open. As I was accused earlier, I did the fire hose technique on spilling out what was in the brain housing group on the various leadership decisions. Was there anything in there that you think you wanted to comment on? Joe, have you been able to rejoin us? Going once, going twice. This is where Barb would go, okay, I'm going to start calling on people. Floor's open. This is your chance to change the direction of what we're doing.
I'm going to give this a try, Steve, if I can.
All right, let's go.
So in the first part of the CGA presentation, there was a slide that was referenced as having the L-shaped flow from a lower box up to an upper box. Whoever was,
yeah, that was
I don't
Bob.
recall who.
Bob's got the control.
Is there any-
You want me to bring it
But that
back
was
up?
it's the outline.
If you can, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, no problem.
Yep.
I was just gonna offer a little opinion from a presenter's perspective.
Yeah,
You know where I'm going, don't you, Steve?
I don't.
I think some elbow grease needs to be applied to some of these slides, but
There we
ahead.
go. That one right there. From a presentation standpoint, this violates the presentation rule and the fact that we've just crammed an overwhelming amount of information into one slide, and your audience has a tendency to disengage when you throw this much information in front of them and they start speed reading rather than listening to the presenter. I was just curious if possibly we couldn't give a really simple depiction of this flow and then maybe make each one of these its own separate slide that you step through briefly thereafter.
I think that's a great idea. Actually, it's been, as I've been going out and doing this presentation too, it's very hard to explain in this format. So I think it would be good to break it up a little bit.
Yeah, if you're reading body language, I think that slide equals a huge disconnect with your audience. All valuable information that we just need to break down and give it to them in bits and pieces.
Thank you, Joe.
I just want to say I loved Bob's animations on this slide, though. They did flow really well.
I usually go through this slide much slower than what we did today too. So I mean, I went through it fast because I know there's a lot of people on this in this group that have seen this stuff at least 2 or 3 times already. So
I do like the last
Steve,
one where they all separate.
Yeah.
Steve and Kelly, Brad here. One thing that I have not heard discussed this entire meeting, in fact, we've never even discussed it at any of the meetings, everybody's aware there's a brand new statewide infrastructure law. Yes, no.
You
Yes.
mean the council?
The Infrastructure Council.
Yeah.
And so we just all need to be aware of that. And that's one of the groups that needs to, this issue needs to be brought in front of them. And then separately, Kelly, I'll contact you because I got a whole laundry list of groups that your message needs to go out to. So
That would be great.
not that you haven't covered them in your list, but I'll give you my list anyhow. So, okay.
Okay, great. On the Infrastructure Advisory Council, we've been kind of following the announcement of that and several of the appointments. But if you have more information on like what's happening so far, I think that would be great because I've been having a little bit of a hard time tracking it.
A, it's very, very slow. B, just a sidelight, you know how these things tend to happen. We actually introduced the MIC to our Minnesota group about 5 or 6 years ago. That's Michigan is the MIC is the Michigan Infrastructure Council, and so for what that's worth, I think this has kind of been a long slog here. But one of these days, it's just going to pop in front of everybody, and it's going to be there. So everybody needs to have their patience. But that is a group that needs to be aware of this.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm gonna throw in a little plug here for Shared Geo on that note there, related to that the field data collection side of the equation, there's a piece that potentially could be used for handling that marking of new infrastructure as it's buried. There's a mechanism in there that could be leveraged either as a separate project or inside of FuzionView or inside of the 811 system. But there's a chunk of the process there that could be leveraged for handling that new infrastructure installation compliance stuff. So just throwing it out there.
Anybody else? Going once,
If you
going
do have
twice.
any other interest in other engineering firms that are doing a lot of work with MnDOT, I'll definitely throw my hat in the ring. Visited with Barb for a while. And Jim Zigman and I from MnDOT actually worked together in the private world several years ago. So I've been trying to work with him on some stuff. I do a lot of utility coordination on a lot of MnDOT projects, a lot of contacts with a lot of different facility operators or those that are in the middle of it, trying to work with the facility operators as third-party designers, and then 2 subsurface companies that we do a lot of work with too. So I'm that weird man in the middle of everything at times. So if interested in their space, yeah, definitely like to join in there with WSB and everybody else that's doing stuff. So
Thank you
but I
for the
think you guys are going in a great direction. So
awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. We don't get people volunteering very often, so thank you.
I found myself in this niche about 10 years ago where I'd already done all the design, project management, business development stuff over the years in my career in Kansas City. And now I'm working for a small firm that's usually a sub. And there's that nice little piece of the scope called utility coordination that they can just pull out as a prime and pass on to us as a sub. So it's been my niche for the last several years. So volunteer, yeah, I guess kind of. But it's fun.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
How you guys are doing?
Anybody else? Going once? Going twice? Maybe we should acknowledge the guy that started all this. Troy. He sends me an email. Where are you, Troy? Did you leave? He sends me an email, and then I start asking questions. Dean starts asking questions, and here we are 5 years later, Troy.
Well, don't blame me for all this.
I don't know. Okay.
No,
All right, everybody. Go ahead.
I haven't made some of the meetings lately, and I'm very impressed with how far you guys have taken things. It's just amazing to see. Yeah, what a thrill. Steve, you're just the spark plug that makes things fire. Bob, you've been just a workhorse, and yeah, my hat's off to you guys. So
Thank you, Troy.
I'm looking
Appreciate
forward
it.
to things. I have a number of things that I want to talk to you guys on the side about. But yeah, maybe it'll be a phone call. You and I can discuss a few things because as we all know, we all see things going into the augmented reality at some point in time. And yeah, hoping that I can help facilitate some things for you folks there.
Cool. Appreciate it. All
Yeah.
right. Thank you, Troy. Appreciate it. Uh, what do you think? Are we at the point where we call it quits? I think we're pretty close. I got to share my screen again. We'll get out of here. A little bit behind the times. Sorry, everybody. We've been jumping around a lot today, and if you've run Zoom, you know it has this tendency to put the Zoom module in front of what you're trying to do. Give me 1 second. All right, there we are. Um, Going once, going twice, gone. Uh, Down to the wrap up. Kelly, it is you've agreed that we need to meet on Thursday, June 12th. We see the head nod, so that's a good thing. Pencil it in. You'll see in the wrap up notes. I'll send you the link stuff. Um, One last chance. Anyone else got any comments? Going once, going twice. Kelly, you got it. The floor is yours.
I just wanted to thank everyone for joining today. And it's obvious here that it feels like people have been working on this for a lot of years and we're kind of coming around to actually making this thing happen. And so just congratulations to everybody who's been working on this for a long time. If you have any suggestions or thoughts on how we should, continue to move this thing forward once it's live, let us know. And that's it.
Thank you, Kelly. All right. Here's what I got for you. You know, um, it takes no genius to observe that a one-man band never gets very big. All right. Let's call it quits. Have a great weekend. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.